February 19, 1933, 3:14 a.m. 15 Italian soldiers surrounded Stephanie St. Clair's brownstone on Sugar Hill. They came with guns and orders to eliminate Harlem's number's queen. 14 hours later, one man walked out alive, carrying a message that would rewrite New York's underworld. The black Packard sedan rolled to a stop on Edgecombe Avenue, engine idling in the pre-dawn silence of Sugar Hill. No headlights. No door slams. Just the careful, practiced quiet of men who'd done this before. 15 of them. All Italian. All armed. All sent by Vito Genovese with one simple instruction. Eliminate the problem in apartment 10. The problem had a name. Stephanie St. Clair. From the lead car, a man they called Salvatore stepped onto the frozen pavement, breath fogging in the February cold. He looked up at the fourth-floor windows of 409 Edgecombe Avenue, the elegant brownstone where Harlem's number's queen lived like royalty. Lights were on. She was awake. Good. Salvatore wanted her to see them coming. Behind him, 14 men fanned out with the efficiency of a military operation. 2 covered the back alley. 4 positioned themselves at the building's service entrance. 3 moved to adjacent rooftops. The rest formed a perimeter around the front entrance, Thompson submachine guns hidden beneath long coats. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. Vito Genovese had been clear. She's had 3 chances to sell. She thinks being a woman protects her. Show her it doesn't. Salvatore checked his watch. 3:17 a.m. In 13 minutes, the first shift of Harlem's number's runners would start their morning collections. By then, Stephanie St. Clair needed to be dead, and her operation needed to understand that Harlem now belonged to the Italian Mafia. He nodded to 2 men by the entrance. They moved toward the door. Inside apartment 10, Stephanie sat at her mahogany desk, fountain pen in hand, finishing her accounting ledger for the week. The numbers were excellent. $18,000 collected just yesterday. Harlem's faith in her lottery never wavered, even in the 3rd year of the Depression. The telephone on her desk rang. What? She didn't move. It rang again. Stephanie set down her pen with deliberate care, smoothed the front of her silk robe and lifted the receiver. Yes, she said quietly. Her Martinique accent still colored certain vowels, even after 21 years in America. The voice on the other end belonged to Officer Raymond Mitchell, 32nd Precinct. One of 7 cops on her payroll. His words came fast, breathless. They're outside. 15 men. Genovese crew. Salvatore's leading. They got Thompson's madam. This ain't a shakedown. This is. I know what it is, Stephanie interrupted, her voice calm as Sunday morning. Thank you, Raymond. She hung up. For exactly 3 seconds, Stephanie St. Clair sat perfectly still at her desk, hands folded, eyes closed. Then she stood, walked to her bedroom and opened the closet door. Bumpy Johnson was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, .45 automatic in his lap. They here? He asked. 15, Stephanie said. Genovese sent Salvatore. Bumpy's jaw tightened. At 26 years old, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson had worked for Stephanie for 3 years. Her enforcer, her protector, her most loyal soldier. He'd killed for her twice. He'd take a bullet for her tonight if it came to that. 15's a lot, madam, he said carefully. Stephanie walked past him to the bedroom window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. Down below, she could see the dark shapes positioning themselves around her building like chess pieces. Predictable. Arrogant. Stupid. Bumpy, she said without turning around. How many men did I tell you to bring tonight? 22, madam. They've been in position since midnight. Rooftops, basement, hallways. Everybody you asked for. And the phone lines? Connected. Amsterdam News on one line. Your lawyer on another. NYPD Commissioner's office on the third. Stephanie let the curtain fall back into place. She turned to face Bumpy, and in the dim light of the bedroom, her expression was completely unreadable. Not afraid. Not angry. Just patient. They think I'm alone, she said softly. They think because I'm a woman I'll panic. They think because I'm colored I don't have leverage. She paused. They've been thinking that for 8 weeks. And for 8 weeks I've been letting them. Bumpy stared at her. You knew they were coming. It wasn't a question. Stephanie walked back to her desk, opened the bottom drawer and removed a thick manila folder. Inside, photographs of Vito Genovese meeting with NYPD Captain Howard Lewis. Bank records showing cash transfers from Luciano family accounts to 3 city judges. Witness statements from 7 Harlem residents documenting Italian Mafia extortion attempts. 8 weeks of evidence. 8 weeks of preparation. 8 weeks of letting Vito Genovese think he was hunting her, when in reality she'd been building his cage. "Make the first call," Stephanie said, handing Bumpy a slip of paper with a phone number. "Tell them it's time." Downstairs, Salvatore and his men had reached the lobby. The night doorman, an elderly black man named Moses, stood up from his chair, eyes wide with fear. "Where's the woman in 10? Salvatore demanded. Moses said nothing. Salvatore pulled a revolver from his coat and pressed it against the old man's temple. "I asked you a question." Moses's hands shook, but his voice didn't. "4th floor," he whispered. "She's awake. I seen her lights on." Salvatore smiled. He gestured to his men and they moved toward the stairwell. None of them noticed Moses's hand slip beneath his desk. None of them heard the single soft click of the buzzer he pressed. In apartment 10, a small light on Stephanie's desk blinked once. She looked at Bumpy. He nodded. "They're in the building," she said. Stephanie St. Clair walked to her closet, removed a burgundy dress and pearl necklace and began to change. If 15 men were coming to kill her, she would meet them looking like exactly what she was. A queen. Outside, February wind rattled the windows. Inside, Stephanie fastened her pearls and waited. She'd been waiting 8 weeks. She could wait 13 more minutes. To understand why 15 armed men were climbing the stairs to kill Stephanie St. Clair on a frozen February morning in 1933, you have to go back 21 years. To a dock in Lower Manhattan. To a 26-year-old woman from Martinique stepping off a steamship with $10 in her pocket, a second-hand suitcase, and a French Caribbean accent that marked her as foreign the moment she opened her mouth. Stephanie St. Clair arrived in New York City the same year the Titanic sank. Another ship full of people who believed America was salvation. For most Caribbean immigrants, America meant backbreaking labor in factories, cleaning white people's homes, or working themselves to death in kitchens for $3 a week. Stephanie looked at those options and said no. Not in English. Not yet. Her English in 1912 was broken, self-taught, inadequate. But her mind? Her mind was fluent in something more valuable than language. Mathematics. Probability. Human nature. 5. Within 6 months of arriving in Harlem, Stephanie found work as a seamstress on Lenox Avenue. Within a year, she was running her own dressmaking business out of a small apartment on 137th Street. Within 2 years, she taught herself to read and write English by studying newspapers and sitting in the back of night classes at the public library. But it was in 1922, 10 years after her arrival, that Stephanie St. Clair saw her real opportunity. The numbers racket. An illegal lottery game where Harlem residents could bet pennies, nickels, or dimes on a 3-digit number between 000 and 999. Every day the winning number was determined by the last 3 digits of the total money bet at a specific racetrack. Published in the daily newspapers, impossible to fix, purely chance. The odds of winning were 1,000 to 1. The payout was 600 to 1. The difference? Pure profit for whoever controlled the game. In 1922, the numbers racket in Harlem was run by small-time black and Caribbean operators, disorganized, unprotected, constantly harassed by police who demanded bribes or shut them down. Stephanie saw inefficiency. She saw opportunity. And she saw something else. Harlem needed this game. During Prohibition, while white Manhattan drank in speakeasies and danced in jazz clubs, Harlem was suffocating under poverty, unemployment, and Jim Crow segregation. The numbers game wasn't just gambling. It was hope. For 10 cents, a laundress could dream of winning $60, 6 weeks' wages. For a quarter, a janitor could imagine paying off his rent for 2 months. Stephanie didn't judge them for dreaming. She built an empire on it. By 1925, Stephanie St. Clair controlled 40% of Harlem's numbers operations. By 1928, she controlled 70%. By 1933, the year 15 Italian mobsters came for her, she was clearing $250,000 per month. In the middle of the Great Depression, while banks collapsed and white businessmen jumped from Wall Street windows, Stephanie St. Clair employed over 300 numbers runners, paid better wages than any legitimate Harlem employer, and moved through Sugar Hill like Caribbean royalty. She lived at 409 Edgecombe Avenue, the most prestigious address in Black America. The building where W.E.B. Du Bois lived. Where Thurgood Marshall would later live. Where Count Basie kept an apartment. Stephanie's apartment had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, French furniture, Persian rugs, and a mahogany desk where she managed an operation more sophisticated than most legal businesses. She kept meticulous records. Every runner's daily take. Every location's performance. Every police officer's bribe amount. Every judge who could be bought, every prosecutor who couldn't. She knew which numbers were popular each week and adjusted her odds accordingly. She knew which runners were skimming and dealt with them quietly. She knew which Harlem families were struggling and sent anonymous envelopes of cash through their church. Stephanie St. Clair didn't just run an illegal lottery. She ran Harlem. But being a black woman running a multi-million-dollar operation in 1920s America came with a price. The police harassed her constantly. She was arrested multiple times. Disorderly conduct, operating an illegal lottery, conspiracy. Every time she hired the best lawyers, walked into court wearing furs and pearls, and either got charges dismissed or paid fines that didn't touch her real assets. White mobsters tried to intimidate her. Dutch Schultz, the Bronx beer baron, sent men to threaten her in 1928. She responded by taking out a full-page ad in the New York Amsterdam News documenting his extortion attempts and publishing the names of every NYPD officer on his payroll. Dutch backed off. For a while. But the real threat came after 1931 when Prohibition ended. Suddenly the Irish, Italian, and Jewish mobs who'd made fortunes bootlegging whiskey needed new revenue streams. And they looked north to Harlem, where an illegal lottery was generating millions. Run by a black woman who had no mafia protection, no political machine, no Italian last name. They saw vulnerability. They saw an easy target. They didn't see Stephanie St. Clair. Here's what made Stephanie different from every other numbers operator in Harlem. She understood that violence was expensive and temporary. Information was cheap and permanent. While other gangsters hired guns, Stephanie hired informants. She had runners who worked part-time for the NYPD and reported back to her. She had secretaries in City Hall who photocopied documents. She had waitresses in Little Italy restaurants who listened to Mafia conversations. She had relationships with editors at the Amsterdam News, The Age, and even white newspapers like the Herald Tribune. Stephanie knew which police captains were taking bribes, and from whom. She knew which judges had gambling debts. She knew which politicians were sleeping with their secretaries. And she kept files. Detailed, organized, explosive files that could destroy careers with a single phone call. This wasn't luck. This was strategy. Stephanie St. Clair had learned something in her 21 years in America. The system was designed to crush people like her. Black, female, immigrant, poor. So she built her own system. By 1933, Stephanie employed a young man named Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy had arrived in Harlem in 1930 from South Carolina, a country boy with a quick temper and a reputation for violence. He'd worked for small-time operators until Stephanie saw something in him: loyalty, intelligence, and a willingness to learn. She hired him as a runner first, then as an enforcer, then as her personal bodyguard. Bumpy Johnson would later become a Harlem legend in his own right. But in 1933 he worked for Stephanie St. Clair. And that meant something. It meant you didn't threaten her without consequences. It meant you didn't underestimate her because she was a woman. And it meant that when the Italian Mafia decided Harlem was theirs for the taking, they were making the biggest mistake of their criminal careers. Vito Genovese and Lucky Luciano saw Stephanie as an obstacle. A woman playing in a man's game. An asterisk with ideas above her station. They offered to buy her out 3 times between January and February 1933. Each time Stephanie declined politely. Each time the offers came with thinly veiled threats. "Lady, you don't understand how this works," one of Luciano's men told her during a meeting at a Lenox Avenue cafe. "This is business. You take the money or you take what comes next." Stephanie sipped her coffee. "I understand perfectly," she said, her Martinique accent wrapping around each word like silk over steel. "You want Harlem. You think I'm weak. You're wrong on both counts." She stood up, placed $2 on the table and walked out. 2 weeks later, Genovese sent Salvatore and 14 men to 409 Edgecombe Avenue. They thought they were going to kill a woman who'd gotten too bold. They didn't know Stephanie St. Clair had been preparing for this exact moment since the first threat arrived. They didn't know she had 22 armed men positioned throughout her building. They didn't know she had phone lines connected to every power center in New York City. They didn't know that the woman they were hunting had spent 8 weeks turning their assassination attempt into a trap. Because Stephanie St. Clair had learned the most important lesson of her life back in 1912, stepping off that steamship with $10 and a dream. In America, power doesn't come from who you are. It comes from who underestimates you. And on February 19, 1933, at 3:14 a.m., 15 Italian mobsters made the fatal mistake of underestimating the numbers Queen of Harlem. January 28, 1933. 7:42 p.m. The first real threat came on a Tuesday. Stephanie was leaving Small's Paradise on 7th Avenue, the jazz club where Harlem's elite gathered to hear live music, drink illegal whiskey, and conduct business that couldn't be discussed in daylight. She just finished a meeting with 3 of her top runners, going over the week's collections. Outside, the January cold hit like a slap. And so did the message. 2 white men in expensive wool coats stood beside her burgundy Cadillac. One leaned against the driver's door, smoking a cigarette. The other stood with his hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the freezing air. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. Stephanie stopped 3 feet away. Behind her, Bumpy Johnson's hand moved instinctively toward the .45 under his coat. Stephanie raised one finger, a silent command. Not yet. Gentlemen, she said, her voice steady. You're leaning on my car. The man with the cigarette smiled. His name was Frankie Luco, a soldier in Vito Genovese's crew, known for breaking legs and collecting debts. Nice car for a cleaning lady, Frankie said. But see, we got a problem. Our friends downtown? They're thinking maybe Harlem needs better management. Professional management. You understand what I'm saying? Stephanie understood perfectly. She also understood that Frankie Luco had a wife in Brooklyn, 2 daughters under the age of 10, and a gambling problem that left him in debt to 3 separate loan sharks. She knew because her information network had been tracking Italian Mafia movements in Harlem for 6 months. I understand you're cold, Stephanie said. And standing in front of my car. Move. Frankie's smile disappeared. Listen, sweetheart. Mrs. St. Clair, Stephanie corrected. Or Madam. Your choice. But not sweetheart. The second man, younger, dumber, laughed. Lady, you got a mouth on you. Someone should teach you manners. Bumpy took 1 step forward. Stephanie raised her hand again. Tell Vito Genovese, she said, looking directly at Frankie, that Harlem is not for sale. Not to him. Not to anyone. And tell him if he sends boys to threaten me again, I'll send them back in ambulances. She walked past them, opened her own car door and slid into the driver's seat. Bumpy followed, eyes locked on the 2 Italians until the Cadillac pulled away from the curb. Frankie Luco watched the taillights disappear down 7th Avenue. Then he walked to the nearest payphone and made a call. January 30, 1933. 2 days after the Small's Paradise confrontation, 3 of Stephanie's numbers runners were jumped on Lenox Avenue. Baseball bats. Broken ribs. A clear message, leave Harlem or this gets worse. Stephanie visited all 3 in Harlem Hospital. She paid their medical bills. She gave each of them $200, 2 months' wages. And she told them something that would become legendary in Harlem. Nobody touches my people without answering to me. Then she made a phone call. 48 hours later, Frankie Luco's car exploded outside his Brooklyn home. He wasn't in it. Stephanie didn't want him dead yet, but the message was received. Violence for violence. Except Stephanie's violence was precise. Calculated. Designed to send a message without starting an all-out war. Not yet. February 3, 1933. The disrespect escalated. A meeting was arranged, neutral territory, a back room at the Red Rooster on 138th Street. Stephanie agreed to sit down with representatives from Vito Genovese's organization. Professional conversation. Terms. Possibilities. She arrived at 8 p.m. in a tailored black dress, fur coat and pearl necklace. Bumpy Johnson and 2 other enforcers accompanied her. Inside the private room, 4 Italian men waited. Not one of them stood when she entered. Strike 1. The man at the head of the table, Anthony Fat Tony Romano, a Genovese captain, gestured to an empty chair with a smirk. Sit down, honey. Let's talk business. Honey. Strike 2. Stephanie remained standing. I was told this was a professional meeting, she said. Fat Tony leaned back in his chair, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. It is. We're here to make you a very generous offer. $50,000 cash for your operations. Your runners keep their jobs. You retire to a nice quiet life. Everybody wins. Except, Stephanie said, Harlem loses its protection. Its jobs. Its independence. Fat Tony shrugged. Harlem don't need a woman pretending to run things. It needs real organization. Real power. He paused, eyes traveling slowly from her face down to her shoes and back up. You're a smart girl. Pretty too. Take the money. Find a husband. Let the men handle this. Silence filled the room. Bumpy Johnson's hand moved toward his weapon. Stephanie touched his arm. One light tap. She walked to the table, placed both hands flat on the wood surface, and leaned forward until her face was inches from Fat Tony's. "I've been running Harlem since you were breaking thumbs for nickels in Little Italy," she said, her voice soft as a blade sliding from its sheath. "I employ 300 people. I move $250,000 a month. I have files on 12 NYPD captains for judges and 2 city council members, including the ones your boss pays. So when you call me girl, and tell me to find a husband, what you're really telling me is that you're stupid." Fat Tony's face turned red. "You threatening me?" "No," Stephanie said. "I'm educating you. There's a difference." She straightened, smoothed the front of her dress and walked toward the door. "Tell Vito Genovese I declined his offer." Again. February 8, 1933. The attacks became systematic. Numbers runners beaten. Collection sites raided. 3 of Stephanie's street-level managers received anonymous letters. "Work for us or don't work at all." The Italian Mafia was applying pressure, testing her resolve, waiting for her to break. But Stephanie didn't break. She adapted. She moved her primary operations to rotating locations, never the same place twice. She hired additional muscle from Harlem's toughest neighborhoods. She increased payments to her police informants and expanded her intelligence network into Little Italy itself. And she started gathering evidence. Photographs of Genovese family members meeting with corrupt cops. Bank statements showing cash transfers from mob accounts to city officials. Witness statements from Harlem residents documenting extortion, assault, and threats. Every piece of evidence went into a manila folder that grew thicker by the day. Stephanie wasn't preparing to fight. She was preparing to destroy. February 14, 1933. Valentine's Day. The final insult came in the form of a dozen dead roses delivered to 409 Edgecombe Avenue. No card. No signature. Just 12 black roses and a message written on the box in crude handwriting. "Last chance. Sell or disappear." Bumpy Johnson wanted blood. "Madam, they're disrespecting you in public now. We gotta hit back. Hard." Stephanie stood at her apartment window, looking out at Sugar Hill, the beautiful, elegant neighborhood where Harlem's most successful black families lived. Doctors, lawyers, musicians, writers, people who'd built something despite a country that tried to crush them at every turn. This was her community. This was what she was protecting. "Bumpy," she said quietly, "how many men can you bring here on short notice? Armed, loyal, ready for a fight." 20, maybe 25. "Why?" Stephanie turned from the window. "Because in the next 5 days Vito Genovese is going to send men to kill me. And when they arrive, I want them to understand they made a mistake." Bumpy stared at her. "You know they're coming?" "How?" Stephanie walked to her desk, opened a drawer and removed a small piece of paper. A note from Officer Raymond Mitchell, 32nd Precinct, one of 7 cops on her payroll. The note, dated February 13th, read, "Genovese gave the order. Salvatore leading. 15 men. Target, you. Timeline, within 1 week. Move locations or prepare. RM." Stephanie had known for 24 hours that an assassination team was coming. And for 24 hours she'd been preparing her response. "Get 22 men," she told Bumpy. "Position them throughout this building. Rooftops, hallways, service entrances. I want them in place by February 18th. Tell them to bring everything they've got." "And you?" Bumpy asked. Stephanie looked at the dead roses on her desk. "I'm going to make some phone calls," she said. "And when those 15 men arrive, they're going to learn something about respect." She picked up the black roses and dropped them in the trash. You don't threaten a queen in her own castle. February 19, 1933. 3:22 a.m. Salvatore and his 14 men moved through the lobby of 409 Edgecombe Avenue like ghosts, trained, professional, efficient. They didn't know Moses the doorman had already pressed the silent alarm beneath his desk. They didn't know that every footstep they took was being tracked by ears pressed against walls 3 floors above. They didn't know Stephanie St. Clair had been expecting them since December 27, 1932, 8 weeks ago. That was the day everything changed. 8 weeks earlier. December 27, 1932. 11:15 a.m. Stephanie sat in her apartment reading the New York-Amsterdam news when her private telephone rang, the line only 7 people had access to. She answered on the second ring. "Madam," the voice said. "Officer Raymond Mitchell. 32nd Precinct. 12 years on the force. On Stephanie's payroll for 6. We got a problem." Big one. I'm listening. Genovese and Luciano had a meeting yesterday. Downtown. I got a contact who heard the whole thing. Raymond's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They're done negotiating. They want Harlem. And they want you gone. Permanently. Stephanie's hand tightened on the telephone receiver. When? Didn't give an exact date. But they're planning it. Salvatore's been assigned. That's the shooter they use for her. I know who Salvatore is, Stephanie interrupted. She knew everything about Salvatore Messina. Born in Sicily 1891. Arrived in New York 1909. 37 confirmed kills for the Genovese family. Specialized in making problems disappear. No witnesses. No evidence. Just bodies that turned up in the Hudson River or never turned up at all. If Vito Genovese assigned Salvatore, this wasn't intimidation. This was extermination. Thank you, Raymond, Stephanie said. Your envelope will be larger this month. She hung up. For exactly 10 seconds, Stephanie St. Clair sat perfectly still at her desk. Then she opened her leather-bound address book and started making calls. The first call went to Bumpy Johnson. I need you to find 22 men. Not boys. Men. Combat experience preferred. Loyal to Harlem. Willing to kill if necessary. Have them ready but on standby. I'll tell you when and where. The second call went to Marcus Garvey Jr., a journalist at the New York Amsterdam News. I'm going to need front page space. So, possibly within 8 weeks. Keep your schedule flexible. The third call went to attorney Samuel Leibovitz, the best criminal defense lawyer in New York, famous for defending the Scottsboro Boys. Samuel, I'm going to need your services. Retainer starts now. I may need you in the middle of the night. Possibly February. Can you guarantee availability? Leibovitz, accustomed to Stephanie's unusual requests, agreed immediately. The fourth call went to Officer Raymond Mitchell. Raymond, I need something from you. Intelligence. Daily reports. Every movement Genovese's crew makes in Harlem. Every meeting. Every conversation you hear about. I need to know when they're coming before they know themselves. The fifth call went to a contact Stephanie rarely used, a photographer named James Van Der Zee, famous for documenting Harlem life. James, I need surveillance photographs. Discreet. Specific targets. I'll provide the locations and names. Can you have your camera ready on short notice? Van Der Zee agreed. The sixth call went to a man named Thomas, who operated a print shop on 125th Street. I need flyers ready to print. Thousands of them. Content to be provided later. Can you guarantee a 4-hour turnaround when I give the word? The seventh call was the most dangerous. It went to someone inside Vito Genovese's own organization, a low-level Italian associate named Carmine who had a weakness for both gambling and Stephanie's forgiveness of his $8,000 debt. Carmine, Stephanie said softly, I need you to do something for me, and if you do it well your debt disappears. Permanently. For 8 weeks, Stephanie St. Clair didn't run. She built. Every day, Officer Raymond Mitchell called with updates. January 4th, Genovese met with Salvatore again. Still planning. No date yet. January 11th, Salvatore's been scouting your building. Saw him on Edgecombe twice this week. January 19th, they're getting impatient. Luciano's pushing for action. January 28th, first contact made. Frankie Luco sent to threaten you. This is the beginning. Every update was catalogued. Every piece of information was filed. And slowly, methodically, Stephanie constructed her trap. The pieces of the trap. Piece 1, the soldiers. Bumpy Johnson recruited 22 men, veterans of World War I, former boxers, Harlem street fighters who'd grown up protecting their blocks from white gangs during the 1919 race riots. Each man was vetted personally by Stephanie. Each man understood the stakes. You'll be protecting Harlem, she told them during a secret meeting in the basement of Abyssinian Baptist Church. Not just me. If the Italians take my operation, they take everything. Your jobs. Your family's safety. Your community. Every man agreed. Starting February 15th, they took positions throughout 409 Edgecombe Avenue in rotating shifts. 2 on the roof. 3 in the basement. 4 in the stairwells. The rest positioned in adjacent buildings with clear sight lines to every entrance. They were invisible. And they were ready. Piece 2, the evidence. While the Italian Mafia focused on intimidation, Stephanie focused on documentation. James Van Der Zee photographed Genovese family members meeting with corrupt NYPD officers outside a restaurant in Little Italy. Bribes exchanged. Envelopes of cash handed over in broad daylight. Stephanie's runners gathered names, which Harlem businesses had been extorted, which families had been threatened, which shops had been vandalized. Carmine, the Italian associate she'd flipped, provided insider information. Bank account numbers, meeting locations, names of politicians on Genovese's payroll. All of it went into a file. A file that grew thicker every day. A file that could destroy the Genovese family's political protection in one newspaper story. Piece 3, The Media. Marcus Garvey Jr. at the Amsterdam News wasn't just standing by. He was writing the story in advance. Headline: Italian Mafia declares war on Harlem. Threats, violence, and the woman who refused to surrender. The story detailed everything. Extortion attempts, beatings of numbers runners, racist threats, corrupt police collaboration. It was ready to print. It just needed one thing: the moment. Piece 4, The Legal Weapon. Samuel Leibovitz, the lawyer, wasn't just on retainer. He'd already drafted an emergency injunction against Vito Genovese, citing harassment, criminal conspiracy, and attempted monopolization of legal Harlem businesses. Stephanie's numbers operation was illegal, but her investment properties weren't. The injunction was prepared, signed, ready to file. All Stephanie needed was the right moment. Piece 5, The Psychological Weapon. This was the most dangerous piece, and it was the one that would break them. Stephanie had Carmine deliver a message to Salvatore, a false piece of information designed to make him overconfident. The message: St. Clair moved her headquarters. She's staying at a safe house in Brooklyn until this blows over. The Edgecombe apartment is empty except for a few servants. It was a lie, and Salvatore believed it. Because men like Salvatore couldn't imagine a woman standing her ground. February 19, 1933. 3:18 a.m. When Officer Raymond Mitchell called with the final warning, "They're moving tonight. 15 men. Salvatore's leading. They're coming for you now." Stephanie didn't panic. She'd been ready for 8 weeks. She hung up the phone and walked to her bedroom where Bumpy Johnson was already awake, .45 in hand. "They're in the building," she said calmly. Bumpy nodded. On the roof, 2 men checked their rifles. In the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, 4 men took positions behind a barricade of sandbags Stephanie had ordered installed 2 weeks prior, disguised as construction materials. In the basement, 3 men waited by the boiler room, controlling the only exit Salvatore's crew hadn't covered. In adjacent buildings, sharpshooters positioned themselves at windows. And in Stephanie's apartment, 3 phone lines sat waiting. Line 1, direct to the Amsterdam News, ready to greenlight the story. Line 2, direct to Samuel Leibovitz, ready to file the injunction. Line 3, direct to NYPD Commissioner Edward Mulrooney's office, a man who owed Stephanie a favor and hated the Italian Mafia's growing power. Everything was in place. 3:24 a.m. Salvatore and his men reached the 3rd floor landing. Silent, professional, confident. They didn't hear the soft click of safeties being released in the darkness above them. They didn't see the men positioned in shadows, waiting. They didn't know that Stephanie St. Clair was standing in her apartment, fully dressed, pearls around her neck, watching the door with the calm patience of a chess player who'd calculated checkmate 12 moves ago. Salvatore raised his hand, a signal. His men prepared to breach the 4th floor hallway. And Stephanie picked up the telephone. "Now," she said quietly into line 3. On the street outside 409 Edgecombe Avenue, 6 NYPD patrol cars, loyal to Commissioner Mulrooney, not to Genovese, pulled up with sirens off, lights dark. 12 officers stepped out, weapons drawn. Inside the building, Salvatore's men heard footsteps behind them. They turned and found themselves surrounded. Bumpy Johnson stood at the 4th floor landing, shotgun leveled. Behind him, 22 armed Harlem men stepped from doorways, stairwells, and rooftop access points. Below, NYPD officers blocked the exits. Above, Stephanie's voice rang out clear and cold through the hallway. "Gentlemen," she said, standing in her open doorway, backlit by the warm glow of her apartment. "You're trespassing." Salvatore's hand moved toward his weapon. "I wouldn't," Stephanie said. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and outplayed." For the first time in his 37-kill career, Salvatore Messina realized he'd walked into a trap. "You have 2 choices," Stephanie continued, her Martinique accent wrapping around each word like silk over iron. "Surrender your weapons and leave with the police. Or resist, and my people will ensure you never leave this building." Silence. Then, slowly, Salvatore lowered his hand. "Smart man," Stephanie said. She looked past him to the 14 men frozen in the stairwell. "But I'm not letting all of you leave." February 19, 1933. 4:47 a.m. 14 men sat on the floor of Stephanie St. Clair's living room, hands zip-tied behind their backs with electrical cord, surrounded by Bumpy Johnson's soldiers. Salvatore Messina sat separate from his crew, alone in a chair facing Stephanie's mahogany desk. No restraints. No gun to his head. Just Stephanie sitting across from him in her burgundy dress and pearls, fountain pen in hand, writing something in her ledger as if 15 armed assassins hadn't just tried to kill her 90 minutes ago. The NYPD officers had already left, taking no prisoners, filing no reports. Commissioner Mulrooney's favor to Stephanie came with plausible deniability. As far as official records would show, nothing happened at 409 Edgecombe Avenue tonight. But something had happened. And Salvatore knew it. He watched Stephanie write, her penmanship precise and unhurried. Behind him, his 14 men sat in terrified silence. 3 had minor gunshot wounds, warning shots from the rooftop sharpshooters. 2 others had been beaten unconscious during the initial surrender and were just now regaining consciousness. None of them would die tonight. That wasn't Stephanie's plan. Finally, she set down her pen and looked at Salvatore. "Do you know why you're still alive?" she asked. Salvatore said nothing. "Because," Stephanie continued, "I need you to deliver a message. And dead men can't talk." She stood, walked to a filing cabinet and removed a thick manila folder. She placed it on the desk between them and opened it. Inside, photographs. Salvatore's face went pale. Photograph 1. Vito Genovese meeting with NYPD Captain Howard Lewis outside Patsy's restaurant in East Harlem. December 3, 1932. Genovese handing Lewis an envelope. Lewis smiling, shaking hands. Stephanie's finger tapped the image. "Captain Lewis has been on your payroll for 3 years, she said. "I have the bank records to prove it. Deposits of $800 every month to an account under his wife's maiden name." Photograph 2. Lucky Luciano entering a brownstone on the Upper East Side. A woman, not his wife, greeting him at the door. "Luciano's mistress," Stephanie said. "Her name is Eleanor Roth. She's married to Judge Samuel Roth, New York State Supreme Court. The same judge who dismissed 6 indictments against your organization last year." Photograph 3. Frankie Luco, the man who'd threatened Stephanie outside Small's Paradise, accepting cash from a Harlem shopkeeper. The shopkeeper's face was bruised. "Extortion," Stephanie said. "Witnessed by 4 people. Documented by my runners. I have 12 more photographs just like this one." Salvatore stared at the photographs spread across the desk. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Stephanie closed the folder. "I want you to go back to Vito Genovese. I want you to walk into whatever room he's sitting in. And I want you to deliver a message. Word for word. Do you understand?" Salvatore nodded. Stephanie leaned forward. "Here is the message." She spoke slowly, clearly. Every word deliberate. "Harlem belongs to Harlem. It is not for sale. It will never be for sale. Tonight you sent 15 men to kill me. 14 are still alive because I allow them to be. If you send anyone else, 1 man, 5 men, 50 men, I will not be this generous." She paused. "I have 8 years of evidence on your operations. Photographs, bank records, witness testimonies, police bribes, political connections, extortion, murder. All of it documented, all of it organized, all of it ready to be delivered to the New York Amsterdam News, the Herald Tribune, the District Attorney's Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Stephanie's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You think you have power because you have guns and politicians. I have something better. I have information. And if you come for me again, I will release everything. Every photograph. Every record. Every name. Your police protection will disappear overnight. Your political allies will abandon you. Your operations will collapse. And the federal government, which is very interested in organized crime, will have everything they need to put you and Luciano in prison for the rest of your lives." She stood up. "This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is a fact. Touch my territory again, and I will burn your empire to the ground from the inside. You will lose everything. And I will sleep soundly knowing I did it with a fountain pen and a filing cabinet." Silence filled the room. Salvatore stared at her. "That's the message?" he asked. "Word for word," Stephanie confirmed. She walked to the window, looked out at the pre-dawn darkness over Sugar Hill, and spoke without turning around. "You have 1 hour to leave Harlem. Take your men. Take your weapons. And do not come back." February 19, 1933. 5:52 a.m. Salvatore Messina and 14 humiliated Italian mobsters walked out of 409 Edgecombe Avenue into the freezing February dawn. No gunshots. No violence. Just the cold, bitter knowledge that they'd been beaten by a Caribbean woman with a telephone and a file cabinet. Bumpy Johnson stood on the building's front steps, shotgun cradled in his arms, watching them disappear down Edgecombe Avenue. "You think they'll listen?" he asked when Stephanie joined him. Stephanie adjusted her fur coat against the cold. "They'll listen," she said. "Because Vito Genovese is a businessman. And I just showed him that killing me costs more than leaving me alone." February 19, 1933. 11:30 a.m. Salvatore Messina walked into Genovese's office in Little Italy. Alone. Vito Genovese sat behind his desk, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling, Lucky Luciano standing by the window. "Where are the others?" Genovese asked. "Alive," Salvatore said. "She let them go." Genovese's face darkened. "She let them go?" "It was a trap," Salvatore said quietly. "She knew we were coming. She had 25 men inside the building. NYPD outside. We were surrounded before we reached the 4th floor." Luciano turned from the window. "How did she know?" "She didn't say. But she has," Salvatore hesitated. "She has files. Photographs. Evidence. On you. On both of you." He recounted the message. Word for word. Exactly as Stephanie had dictated. When he finished, the room was silent. Genovese stood up slowly, walked to the window and stared out at the New York skyline. "How much evidence?" he asked. "She showed me 3 photographs," Salvatore said. "She claims to have 8 years' worth. Is she bluffing?" "No," Salvatore said. "I saw the photographs. They're real. Captain Lewis taking bribes. Extortion victims. Everything." Luciano lit a cigarette. "So what are you saying? We let an woman run Harlem?" Salvatore met his eyes. "I'm saying she's too expensive to kill." February 21, 1933. Vito Genovese made a decision. He didn't announce it publicly. He didn't send a message to Stephanie. He simply issued a quiet order to his entire organization. Leave Harlem alone. No explanations. No justifications. Just an order. And in the unwritten rules of organized crime, that order meant something. Stephanie St. Clair had won. The Italian Mafia never sent another assassin to 409 Edgecombe Avenue. They never made another offer to buy her out. They never again underestimated the numbers queen of Harlem. Because on February 19, 1933, Stephanie St. Clair taught them a lesson that would echo through New York's underworld for decades. Power doesn't come from who has the most guns. It comes from who has the most to lose. And the man with secrets is always weaker than the woman who knows them. 3 days later, Stephanie sat in her apartment, reading the New York Amsterdam news. The front-page story she'd prepared, the exposé on Italian Mafia extortion, never ran. She didn't need it anymore. The threat was enough. Bumpy Johnson sat across from her, cleaning his .45. "They're really gone?" he asked. Stephanie smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "They're gone." "How long you think that'll last?" Stephanie closed the newspaper. "As long as they remember what it cost them to come here in the first place." She stood, walked to her filing cabinet, and locked the manila folder back inside. Insurance. Forever. The Italian Mafia never came back. Dutch Schultz tried 2 years later, and lost. Corrupt police captains tried to shut her down a dozen times, and failed. Prosecutors hauled her into court on gambling charges, conspiracy, disorderly conduct, and she walked out every single time wearing furs and pearls, smiling for the cameras. Because after February 19, 1933, everyone in New York's underworld understood a simple truth. Stephanie St. Clair could not be broken. For the next 7 years, Stephanie's numbers empire flourished. $250,000 a month in 1933 became $400,000 by 1937. She employed over 500 runners by 1940. She owned rental properties throughout Harlem, invested in legitimate businesses, beauty parlors, barbershops, restaurants, and became one of the wealthiest self-made women in Black America. But wealth was never the point. Protection was. Every week, Stephanie's runners delivered envelopes to families who couldn't make rent. Every month, she donated to Abyssinian Baptist Church, the NAACP, and the Urban League. Every year, she funded scholarships for Harlem students who couldn't afford college. She wasn't Robin Hood. She was something more dangerous. A businesswoman who understood that loyalty bought with generosity lasts longer than loyalty bought with fear. The story of 15 Italian mobsters and one survivor became legend in Harlem. People told it in barbershops, whispered it in church basements, repeated it with pride. You hear what Queenie did? Sent 15 guineas home crying to their mothers. Didn't fire a single shot. Didn't need to. The story grew with each telling. Some versions had 30 mobsters, some had 50. But the core remained the same. A black woman from Martinique outsmarted the most powerful crime families in New York. Not with violence, with intelligence. But Stephanie's life wasn't without tragedy. In 1935, Dutch Schultz, who tried repeatedly to take Harlem, was assassinated by the Commission, the ruling body of Italian-American organized crime. When Stephanie heard the news, she allegedly sent a telegram to his hospital room. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Whether she sent it or not, the story spread. And it cemented her reputation as someone who always got the last word. In 1936, she married Sufi Abdul Hamid, a charismatic, controversial black nationalist leader. The marriage was stormy, passionate, and ultimately violent. In 1938, Hamid tried to attack her during an argument. Stephanie shot him. He survived. She was charged with assault. At trial, she testified calmly about years of abuse, manipulation, and threats. The jury acquitted her in less than 2 hours. Even in her personal life, Stephanie St. Clair would not be controlled. By 1940, Harlem was changing. The Depression was easing. World War II loomed. And a new generation of black leaders, ministers, activists, politicians, began questioning the morality of the numbers racket. Stephanie didn't argue with them. She'd never pretended her business was legal or moral. She'd only ever claimed it was necessary. In a country that won't hire us, won't house us, won't treat us like human beings, she said in a rare interview with the Amsterdam News in 1942, we create our own opportunities. That's what the numbers game is. It's Harlem taking care of Harlem. Stephanie St. Clair gradually stepped back from daily operations throughout the 1940s. Bumpy Johnson, her former employee and protector, took over much of her territory with her blessing. Their relationship had evolved from employer-employee to partners, and eventually to mutual respect between two legends. Bumpy learned everything from Madame Queen, people said in Harlem. And it was true. The strategic thinking, the information networks, the community protection. All of it came from Stephanie. By the time Bumpy became the most famous gangster in Harlem, he never forgot who taught him how to survive. Stephanie retired in the early 1960s. She lived quietly in her apartment at 409 Edgecombe Avenue, the same apartment where 15 men once came to kill her and failed. She read voraciously, French literature, political philosophy, Caribbean history. She donated to civil rights organizations. She attended church every Sunday. And she kept her files. The manila folder with 8 years of evidence on the Genovese family, the Luciano family, corrupt cops, compromised judges, bought politicians. Insurance. Even in retirement, Stephanie St. Clair was untouchable. December 1969. Stephanie St. Clair died at age 83. The New York Times gave her 3 paragraphs in the obituary section, calling her a Harlem numbers operator, with no mention of her strategic genius, her community protection, or the fact that she defeated the Italian Mafia without firing a shot. The Amsterdam News gave her a full page, with photographs, testimonials, and the headline, Harlem's Queen, Stephanie St. Clair 1886 to 1969. Hundreds attended her funeral at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Former numbers runners, now elderly. Families she'd helped during the Depression. Business owners she'd funded. And Bumpy Johnson, who sat in the front row and wept openly. She taught me everything, he told mourners. Not just about the streets. About dignity. Today if you walk through Harlem, past 409 Edgecombe Avenue, there's no historical marker. No plaque commemorating Stephanie St. Clair. No museum exhibit about the Caribbean immigrant woman who built an empire, defied the Mafia, exposed police corruption, and protected an entire community during America's darkest economic period. History forgot her. Or rather, history tried to forget her. Because Stephanie's story is inconvenient. She was a criminal who protected her community. A woman who commanded men. An immigrant who refused to bow to American racism. A black strategist who outsmarted white gangsters at the height of Jim Crow. She doesn't fit the narrative of respectable black history or the narrative of ruthless male gangsters. So she was erased. But erasure isn't the same as disappearance. In Harlem, elders still tell the story of Queenie, the woman who couldn't be broken, couldn't be bought, and couldn't be killed. They tell their children about February 19, 1933. About 15 men and one message. About a woman who defeated the most powerful crime families in New York with a telephone, a filing cabinet, and the kind of strategic genius that men spent decades trying to understand. Stephanie St. Clair never apologized for who she was. She never asked permission to build her empire. She never waited for history to recognize her brilliance. She simply lived her truth, that intelligence beats violence, strategy beats strength, and a woman with information is more powerful than an army with guns. On February 19, 1933, 15 Italian mobsters learned that lesson. One survivor carried the message back. And the empire Stephanie St. Clair built, not with bullets but with brilliance, stood untouchable until the day she chose to walk away. That's not a crime story. That's a legacy.